This is episode 157 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Lane Kawaoka. Lane is the author and CEO of The Wealth Elevator. The Wealth Elevator focuses on real estate syndications, accredited investor banking, and tax strategies for first-gen millionaires. And Lane wants to be the person to take these people from the investment floors all the way up to financial freedom. Lane, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jonathan. Aloha, everybody.
Yeah, very excited to have you. And you've actually been through a ton of asset classes. So let's start all the way at the beginning. When was the first time that you remember real estate being in your forefront of your mind to be something that eventually could create this generational wealth that you're helping others do now as well?
Yeah, 2009, bought my first house to live in, eventually turned it into a rental. This was when I was in my early 20s, was as a working engineer, construction manager. I was working on the road all the time.
Yeah.
And I was owning a home on Saturday. So I just decided to rent it out, knew nothing about rent to value ratio or just higher property management. But hey, that's how it all started. And I got addicted to this stuff back then.
Yeah. When you bought that first property, though, I like to ask this because I think there's so many of us who didn't think like that. Did you think of yourself as a real estate investor at that time?
No, I mean, I come from a very money prudent family, right? We weren't broke, that's for sure, but we weren't super wealthy. My parents always said, oh, you never want to have a rental property. The tenants will just mess up your property, right? Your home is your pride and joy.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what my operating system was, go to school, study hard, invest in the 401k stuff, have 2.1 kids and, buy a house to live in, right? And pay it down the mortgage.
I don't particularly enjoy being a landlord. I don't know about you. That's what's attractive about syndications for me. Even being an LP now, it's like if I'm trusting the operator, I'm just buying into something that I've already vetted and watching it produce. Is that something that you started to think about as you were thinking about maybe, getting rid of those properties and looking into more syndications or, quote, more passive deals?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there. But that said, you listen to a lot of podcasts and content out there. Very rarely, the audience target is, generally pointed towards the younger guy, the guy who has way too much time on his hands, certainly doesn't make more than six figures at their professional career, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of where, when I wrote the new book, The Wealth Elevator, there was never a book written for, people who already were accredited investors. And most of the books out there are written for lower net worth guys who don't even make 50 grand. And the Susie Ormans and the Dave Ramsey. I actually met Dave Ramsey. I mean, I like the guy, I like the content.
Yeah.
But that content is specifically made for people in debt, don't have, incomes higher than $50,000, $100,000. And I get it. That's the advice that you need for most people. But what do you do with the people who are very financially conscientious, right? I mean, I had a Roth IRA when I was in my teenage years. What do you do when you're already a accredited investor, right? There's a different dichotomy and paradigm here. And that was kind of what I thought was kind of the underserved market out there.
I remember I was very fortunate because my dad was always talking about wealth generation and money. But for most people, they don't hear anything. They don't learn anything in school about any type of alternative finance other than you get paid for a job. And then they go out in the world and they make money and they pay their taxes, but they're not really thinking, hey, what's going to happen later? The paycheck to paycheck mentality hopefully stops. But then a lot of people now, they would earn more, spend more. And then if you do that and have kids, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, but that's what most people do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, I mean, what I set up in the wealth elevators, there's different floors to the wealth elevator. Obviously, is the basement level, the get out of debt. We don't really, I mean, I have a brief chapter about that, but I focus more on where I started, right? The first floor, which is you're under $1 million net worth, you're trying to buy some rentals, and then you're moving up to the second floor of the wealth elevator. I think that's most of the people within our ecosystem. You've got $1 million, $2 million net worth, you're trying to get into real estate, rental properties are just too much of a pain, high liability. How can you vet out good operators and sponsors and find out good deals and piece together this portfolio of alternative assets? And then, what comes next, right? The third floor and then the penthouse, and this is kind of where I was never really a trust fund kid, right? Like I have to figure this out stuff on my own, right? And that's kind of where most of our folks are first generation multimillionaires, right? We don't have I mean, I think you mentioned, right? Like your parents did this, but it was sort of like pieced together on their own, right? Like
Yeah,
it
my
wasn't.
dad came from nothing. He figured it out. He figured it out by himself. I mean, he was probably like, I don't know, he was before Carlton Sheets, but he was probably listening to tapes or reading the newspaper trying to figure out how to do real estate, on the side, and he did. But yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of first gen millionaires also come with the pressure from their parents who are saying like, "Hey, do it the slow and steady way, stick with your job, be a doctor, be a dentist, hoard the money."
This is something I kind of, I teach a lot of my folks to vet deals, not from like a purely underwriting standpoint, because I think this definitely goes beyond the scope of most passive investors.
Yeah,
Most passive investors, I'll give you an analogy, like cars. I don't know anything about cars, right? I might be an engineer. I don't know anything about it. So I'm going to buy a used car. Well, actually, that's why I buy new cars, because I don't want to be like cheated. But if I were to buy a used car, I would take them to mechanic, or I would like have my buddy who does know cars. I'm gonna ask him, "Hey, tell me 3 things I should spot check."
yeah,
Just so the 80/20 rule, right? So in real estate syndication, in my opinion, the biggest thing, 3 things to check is what is the reversion cap rate and the difference between that and the prevailing cap rate today. What is the assumed occupancy in the deal? May not be the most biggest lever, but it's one of the easiest things I think past investors can look through a pitch deck and spot out. And the last one is like, what are the rent escalators? Like, what is the assumption that the rents go up every single year? So for the reversion cap rate, right there, you want to assume that you're going to sell in a weaker market in the future. So it makes sense for the reversion cap rate to be slightly a quarter point, half a point higher than the prevailing cap rate than it is today.
uh
The occupancy, that thing isn't going to run at 95% occupancy. It's going to usually be about 92%. And then you add on a few percent points for economic vacancy in there too, right? If you see a pitch deck that's showing you 96% occupancy, that's just too high. That ain't going to
yeah,
happen.
yeah,
That's wishful thinking. And if you see a deal that's anything higher than 3% rent increases per year, maybe scratch your head a little bit, right? None of these are
yeah.
disqualifiers, but I think it's good starting points. And that's where when I first started to invest, these were the things that I spot checked out first, right? Before I ran into my analyzer and kind of did do full due diligence. But I think, again, I don't want to this passive investor thing should be relatively easy. You're not going to be an underwriting specialist, right? If
Yeah, yeah.